All right, tonight we're going to go to 1 Chronicles 4, verses 9 and 10. And most of us know this maybe by the title of a book that someone wrote a while back called The Prayer of Jabez. You know, and I know from my memory of it, a lot of the stuff that they talked about in the book is stretching a little bit, I think. But anyway, it's, you know, they're the ones that come up with it, so I'm assuming that they prayed before they wrote it. But anyway, tonight I'm going to talk a little bit. I really didn't title the message because there's just so much you could pull out of these two verses right here to come up with a name. So I feel led to maybe call it, Are You Living an Honorable Life? So starting in verse 9, it says, Jabez was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother called his name Jabez, saying, Because I bore him in pain. Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, Oh, that you would bless me, enlarge my border, and your hand might be with me, and that you might keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain. And God granted what he asked. And just a little backstory on Chronicles. If you read the book, you know it's mostly talking about who the daddy, right? Talking about this one begat that one, you know, it just gives a list, it gives a lineage of who, you know, of how the relations come through to bring us to Jesus Christ. Amen. And so the book, they say, they believe is written by Ezra. And Ezra, you know, he's got a book in here, you know, titled by his name, right? The book of Ezra. But also, he was the one who brought revival to the Israelites after their being released from captivity in Babylon, right? And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Jabez. He come from the tribe of Judah. You know, we read all these other fathers and different things, and you know we're looking at all this other, and we can only deduct that Jabez was the oldest son, right? Because mostly when he's talking about this lineage, it's mostly focusing on the dad and the eldest son, right? And so it says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. And I look at that, and it reminds me of how, how our life should honor God, right? Does this mean that maybe his brothers were, rebellious? We don't know that, right? It's just this little snippet of Jabez in his life. It kind of almost looks like it's out of place if you look and read the scriptures, right? It goes from this one begat that one and on down the line, and then all of a sudden it talks about Jabez. So for whatever reason, we're going to talk about it tonight. So it says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. And I want to talk about that in the sense that the one thing I know about honor is it buys equity, right? It buys equity, right? When I look at just in my own life, right, even with this opportunity of being at the prison, being able to get keys to go and do the ministry without the state chaplain being there, I look at it and I wonder, how do people see honor, or how do they determine who's honorable, right? And I don't think it's really up to people. I think it's more God than man, right? More God's idea, because I know when you honor God with everything in your life, right? When you honor God, He makes things happen in your life that couldn't normally happen, right? I mean, I see it in my own life. And I look at how it says that he was more honorable than his brothers. And you know, and I don't know that, like I say, it don't give a lot of information about his brothers or his mom or even if his dad was even alive, right? But it talks about how that honor, his relationship with God, right? His relationship with God is what is honorable, right? And, you know, I look at how, you know, these guys that I talk to in prison, they try to ask me how things happened in my life the way it did, because a lot of them, you know, got to see me at my worst, see God change my life, and are able to, because they're still doing time, they're able to see me come into these prisons and minister, you know, and I think a lot of times the only answer I can give them is because I try to do my best to honor God with everything I do, right? I honor God because I don't listen to music that doesn't glorify Him. I don't watch things on TV. I don't, you know, don't hang out in places I don't need to hang out in. I don't allow things to be a part of my life that could dishonor Him. Because I think that if we're truly following Him, if we're truly a child of God, we want to honor Him, right? Because, you know, His Word says that we're supposed to honor our mothers and fathers. So why wouldn't we honor God, right? Why wouldn't we honor God if He's truly our Father? Why would we want to do anything that would dishonor Him? Because I think the blessings of God comes when we honor Him. And, you know, and am I saying that, you know, everything that I watch has to do with God? No. I like to watch RV channels. I like to watch mechanic channels. I like to watch stuff like that. But I'm not watching stuff that dishonors God, right? And I'm not hanging out with people that dishonor God. I get invited by my cousins, by my, you know, some of my family to come do this, come be a part of that. And I know what goes on in those situations, right? And I can't let myself do that, right? Because it's not that I don't want to be around them. It's just that I know that it's not equitable for my life, right? If somebody sees me, they say, well, you're a minister and you're hanging out here doing this. You call yourself a Christian and you're over here doing that. See, I just want us to understand tonight the importance of honoring God with our life, because that's what we're called to do, right? And I'm going to go on. It says, and his mother called his name Jabez, saying, because I bore him in pain. Now, we don't know what the pain was. We don't know if it was a painful childbirth. We don't know, again, like say, if the dad may have died or what, you know, apparently probably not, since he had brothers, right? And so we don't know that, but how many of us, I mean, I can speak for myself, how many of us have caused pain in our life? In somebody else's life, right? A lot of us, right? And so, you know, it's almost like his mom, you know, in the Hebrew culture, naming a child was usually put on the mother, and a lot of times the name that they give them was associated with a curse, right? And so, you know, otherwise, why would God need to change their names, right? And so, the mom, you know, bearing him in pain, You know, I think, you know, growing up, probably Jabez thought, you know, or was reminded every time he heard his mom call his name, he was reminded how much he hurt her, right? And I know I can look back on my own life and think about the pain that I caused my mom living the life I lived, right? Because I know that if she had lived to see me go to prison, that would, if she lived, that would have killed her. That would have taken her all the way out. And so I know what it's like to cause pain. I know what it is to cause these things in someone else's life. And, you know, even though that may be part of who I used to be, I know that God can give me the ability to overcome that, to find forgiveness, right, for myself. Right? One of the biggest things I think people struggle with in life is forgiving themselves because of the mistakes they make. Right? And so, verse 10 is believed that Jabez, you know, is grown up at this time, right? There may be a decade or two from verse 9 to verse 10. It says, Jabez called upon the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me, enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain." And God granted what he asked. That tells me right there that Jabez had a great relationship with God. Right? But I think that God says in his word that, you know, that he will give us the desires of our heart, right? He says in his word that, you know, all we have to do is that he already knows what we need before we speak it, right? And so I look at how Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border." Right? And some translation it says, "increase my coast." Right? And, you know, that's one of the things that the church today, you know, the American church, they're so focused on the increase, like God is just the genie in a bottle, and, you know, I need this and I need that, and God, I deserve this, and God, you know, I want you to give me what I need, right? But God says in his word, sometimes when he don't answer our prayers, it's because we ask amiss, right? We're not asking God for the right thing in our life. And I think about how, you know, I look at my own life, and, you know, I know this isn't talking about increasing stuff, right? Because I look at my own life, I've got enough stuff, right? It ain't that I need more stuff. It ain't that I need better stuff, right? But it's that I need God to move in my life that I might impact the world for his glory, right? I think that's what he's asking. And I look at how, you know, I've shared how I prayed for over a year to go in this Georgia prison and in this Alabama prison. And it's because I was wanting God to give me the opportunity to share in these men's life the life-changing power of Jesus Christ. Right? Because one of the things that I know is the best way to minister to somebody is when you know that they may be going through something you've probably already been through. Right? These guys, you know, there's guys there that I've done time with, and there's guys there that just met me for the first time. And most of them will come up to me after class or after a service or whatever and tell me, "Man, I really needed that encouragement today because I'm going through some stuff." Right? And you don't ever know, you know, Catherine Kim walking this lake, you don't ever know when there's somebody there that you may can minister to, because, you know, God don't put people in our path for no reason, right?
Amen.
He doesn't it's not an accident that the people we meet day by day is, that it's just a coincidence, because I believe God has put us on this earth to go forth and share the gospel, right? And I think that's what Jabez is asking him, to give him the opportunity to share what the impact, living a life, honoring God, serving God, what it looks like, and giving him the opportunity to go into the world and just share what God has done in his life, right? And that being honored, like I say, is an equity. Let's look at Proverbs 3 and 4. I know it's not on the thing, but it was kind of a last minute thought. Get my phone doesn't operate. Proverbs 3 and 4. So let's start at 3. It says, "Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so that you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man." When you've got favor with God, you've got favor with man. I can guarantee you that 100%. When you've got favor with God, you've got favor with man. And, I think about how God continues to work in our lives sometimes, and, we never know who we're going to meet, right, that may impact our life. I know from the time I got out of prison, God just seemed like he was just putting people after people after people in my life to make a difference, to make an impact, to encourage me, to help me to get in a place, like I say, I look back on what all God has done in my life, and it's like, that can't be real. It's like I'm almost dreaming, because, who would have ever thought somebody who lived a life like I did could get out, become not only a prison minister, but an ordained minister through the Assemblies of God, get a full pardon from the state of Alabama, be honored by the governor that signed your pardon, right? Everybody in Alabama that watched the State of the State address that night got to hear, the highlights of my testimony. And I like I say, I look at that and I wonder how I found that favor, and the only thing that points to is God.
Amen.
Because I'm not, I can look and show you how unworthy I was to be a part of any of it. But God said no. Right? God said that I've got plans for you. I've got things for you to do, and for you to do those things, I need you to be a part of this situation. And so I look at that and I think about how God is, willing to do that in everybody's life. Right? And all He asks of us is to honor Him, to live a life that is just a life that makes Him proud. Right? I think about the song that talks about, I am my Father's child. He looks at me and it makes him smile. I don't remember. I'm not great on remembering song lyrics, but I do know that, I wonder when I think about how much I live life making God sad and angry. And now to think about how I've lived a life that makes him smile. And I'm just grateful tonight that I know that just like Jabez, even though I could look at the mistakes I made in life or the pain I've caused, that God can still use me. He can still use you. Right? He still has a purpose, right? And Jabez, it says that Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border." You know, bless, you know, if you look up all the different meanings, that means fortunate, right? Above, right, and not below. The head, not the tail, right? God is in the business to bless us. And He, you know, He does that because we have that relationship and we live a life that honors Him, right? And a lot of it is our prayer. I believe Jabez had a prayer life, right? I believe he knew that calling out to God and asking Him, right? Because He wants us to be specific in our prayers, right? He don't want to say, "God, my car is falling apart. I need a new car." No, you ask God for, you want a red Ferrari, ask Him for one, right? He might not give you one, but, you know, because God's not going to give you something that's going to distract you and pull you away from Him, right? And even though we may sometimes get connected to things that will do that, right? Whether it's a job, whether it's making more money, whether it's a relationship, whatever, you know, because you can see sometimes when people start getting some of the things that they ask, suddenly that becomes an idol in their life, and it starts pulling them away. You know, you'll see them miss a Sunday here or Wednesday there, or make an excuse because they're not being here when, you know, when they talk about how much they love God. And I know that there's things that happen in life that may keep us from being in church. I know that Catherine and I, when we travel places, we always try to go ahead and be looking for a church to go to while we're there. Right? And so, you know, because we want to be in the house of the Lord. And he asked and said that your hand might be with me. You know, when God's got His hand upon you, anything that He sets you to do, He's going to give you the ability to do it. Amen. He's going to give you the ability to do it because God has never asked us to do something that we're not capable of doing through Him. Right? There's things that we can't do on our own, but everything that God calls us to, we're capable of doing. Right? We just give it to Him. And He goes on to say that you would keep me from harm so that it might not bring me pain. Right? God was going to help us develop relationships and opportunities to not let pain become a part of our life. Right? We're not making stupid choices, because in other versions of this verse says that you keep me from evil, right? Amen. When God's hand is upon you, He's going to let you know, right? I know for me, even before I knew God, I would go do something stupid, and you know, knowing all the time that little small voice was telling me, "You don't need to go do that." And the first thing out of my mouth is, "I knew I shouldn't have did that." Right? Am I the only one?
No.
So I know that when we're walking that walk with God, He's going to do His best to get us. Now, can we choose to step off the path? Absolutely.
Yes.
But He's going to give us every opportunity to make the choice. Either we're going to follow Him the way He's leading us to go, or either we're going to keep making our own choices.
That's right.
Paying the stupid tax, right?
Yeah.
It says, and God granted what He asked. How many of us tonight have been asking for a while for God to do something in our life? A lot of us, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of us. Has He answered it yet?
It's on the way. It's on the way.
It's on the way. But why aren't we in the mindset of believing that God's going to answer yes?
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times I hear people say, I hope God, right? Part of our walk as a Christian is to believe, right? We got to believe that God is going to be the God He says He is, that He's not a man that He should lie. So if He's promised something, if you know that you're not asking out of line with His Word something in your life, why wouldn't we go ahead and start thanking Him for what He's going to do? Right? Because I know that if we continue to let the world tell us, that, oh, you're just wasting your time praying because, that God stuff, that's just a fairy tale. Because you hear it every day. That's just a fairy tale. Your sky daddy ain't going to do nothing for you. So when we are asking God to expand our coast, why aren't we being boastful about the prayers that He's answered?
Amen.
Even if it's just a thing that we think is just minimal, that, it's not no big deal. But, if it's big enough deal to ask God, would you do this for me? It's a big enough deal to give Him praise and glory and honor because He is worthy. Amen. One more verse tonight. Isaiah 6:1. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of His robe filled the temple. Tonight, I don't know who this was for. It was kind of I felt like God was asking me to preach one message tonight, but He kept pulling this one up to my attention. But how many of us tonight maybe have a king in our life that needs to die? An idol. Something that we're putting above God. That we really don't have that relationship with God that we really need, and we wonder why things keep happening in our lives. And we wonder why we keep struggling and suffering and whatever the situation is. And see, I can't answer that question for you. That's something you have to answer. That's something that I'm sure God is already trying to point it out to you, that this thing don't need to be a part of your life anymore. Whether it's unbelief, whether it's a relationship, whether it's something that you're desiring outside of what God's plan is for your life. Because if we're not seeing God high and lifted up, above everything else in our life, above the material things in our life, our bank account, even our spouse, right? Even our kids and grandkids. If we're not seeing God above all that, then we're missing the mark. Because He says in His Word, if you don't hate your mother and your father and your family, right, that you're not fit for the kingdom. Does that mean you gotta hate your wife? No. Does it mean you gotta hate your children? No. But it means that they need to be in the proper place for God to move in your life, right? If you remember the illustration I used, I think the last time I preached about the umbrella, it showed Christ, the husband, the wife, the children. God has got to be number one in our lives. God's got to be our everything, or he's our nothing, right? Because he says he don't share his glory with anybody or anything. So I want to encourage you tonight. I don't know if that's for you. Maybe God's been tugging at your heart tonight, but I just want to encourage you tonight that if there's something in your life and you're wondering why life just seems to keep rolling downhill instead of you taking those 3 or 4 steps forward, you just seem to be getting knocked 10 back. Ask yourself, ask God, is there something in my life that doesn't belong? Will you help me get rid of it? Amen. So that being said, if you need prayer tonight, it doesn't have to be about that. If it is about that, I'm sure that you know that's between you and God, but I'm just going to ask if you need prayer tonight, come and I'll pray for you. You don't have to get up yet.
Every time I get in church, it's really I've been hurt the whole time. Because every time I come to church, I just wish God. Well, I wish the devil would just leave me alone, and I pray God. I do everything in the world, but it seems like the devil just does not want me to leave.
You tell the devil to leave you alone.
Leave me alone. I just told him a little while ago. I said, "God, you know what? You ain't gonna be honest."
Because God says we have authority over it.
Oh, yeah.
That's where you got the keys to the kingdom to hell and the grave, right? Because we have authority over the devil, right? And it's through the boldness that we have to say, devil, you don't belong to my life, right? A lot of times it ain't just the devil, right? I want you to think about it. Father, just thank you right now for Jeff. Father, I just pray that you would move in his life right now. That this